Foundling homes, orphanages for abandoned children, underwent an enormous transition between the 19th and 20th century. Before the late 19th century, European foundling homes were generally unsuccessful in lowering infant mortality because of the cultural pessimistic stance on children. But starting in the Romantic movement, foundling homes developed higher quality care due to the emphasis on emotional connection to children. Foundling homes or hospitals became fairly widespread in Europe around the 17th century. They could be found in France, Spain, Portugal, Austria, and Russia. Infanticide was a very common issue because of poverty and the disgrace of illegitimate children. Many European infants were killed by smothering or abandonment. Abortions were illegal and unsafe, so foundling homes offered a much-needed alternative. In 1770 France, 1/3 of children born were brought to foundling homes. Throughout the 18th century, there was still a dire need for foundling homes and hospitals. They took in about 100,000 European foundlings a year and became a favorite charity of the Catholic Church and the upper class. Foundling home admission was not exclusive. Any child would be taken in. It was also confidential so that mothers did not feel shame about abandoning their children. Oftentimes, midwives or town officials would bring foundlings to the homes as well. The foundling wheel was developed to help facilitate secret deliveries to homes. It was a turning cradle in which a baby could be placed from the outside, and then a bell would ring to alert the nurse inside. Women who nursed infants in foundling homes were called wet nurses. Wet nurses were typically mainly concerned about money and therefore performed their job poorly and without emotion. Internal wet nurses took care of infants inside the hospital and typically were in charge of 2 to 3 babies each. External wet nurses were women hired to take foundlings to their own homes and nurse them there. External wet nurses were allowed only 1 foundling each and were required to have a medical exam and a signed certificate from their local priest assuring good moral standings. Foundling home officials did their best to hire as many rural external wet nurses as possible because it was the most ideal option for foundlings. Although foundlings were cared for, they didn't always survive. Dublin Foundling Hospital, which closed in 1796, out of 12,641 foundlings left there, only 145 were to be traced as having survived. At the Naples Foundling Hospital, 80% of foundlings between 1826 and 1830 died before they turned 1. Elizabeth Fry described her trip to the Foundling Hospital in Paris. She noted the rows of clean white cots, each with a tightly swaddled baby inside, and said it was rare that she would walk down the row and not discover a dead one. Their noise was like lambs bleating, faint and pitiful, she said. The Foundling Hospital of London was opened in 1756. Out of at least 14,934 infants, 4,400 lived to leave. There were simply too many babies to be successful. The hospital was said to, instead of being a protection to the living, was a charnel house for the dead. Many factors worked against foundling homes and caused them to struggle. As the numbers show, the sheer mass of children made it difficult to keep them alive. Having to share wet nurses and not be nursed as much gave foundlings a much greater chance of death. Foundling homes often had poor hygiene and therefore disease spread quickly among infants and their nurses. One of the many diseases that devastated foundling homes was syphilis. Although we know syphilis famously to be a sexually transmitted disease, it was passed through breastfeeding from nurse to infant or infant to nurse. In the 19th century, there was an outbreak of syphilis in Italian foundling homes. Syphilitic babies were breastfed by wet nurses who shared the same plight. Infected wet nurses often spread the disease to their husbands and biological children as well and were paid by the foundling home extra after they got syphilis. As to not infect wet nurses, babies had to stay in the foundling home for 3 months until they were cleared of syphilis, and that in turn caused many infants to die. Along with the vast scale of foundlings and disease among them, European culture caused foundling homes to struggle. During the illegitimacy explosion at the end of the 18th century, which led to many shamed mothers and abandoned kids, there was a general culture of not caring for children. If possible, mothers rarely nursed their young, and instead hired wet nurses for their own children. The presence of absolutism in places like Russia encouraged more children, seeing them as an opportunity for more loyal subjects to the monarchy. Napoleon wanted more children so they could join the army. This led to too many kids and not enough caring mothers. Attitude toward children could be seen in the emotional distance of wet nurses and the amount of child abandonment in societies. When the Romantic movement hit Europe, it sparked a major shift in attitudes toward children. Because Romanticism emphasized emotion, it simultaneously encouraged homemaking, kinship, and a general interest in children. When labor laws were passed that made it more difficult for kids to work, people began to have less children, which led to fewer foundlings. The use of contraception became popular as well. Activists began to advocate for the rights of babies who were not getting good enough care from their external wet nurses, who were now called foster parents. Foundling homes and hospitals transformed into schools. Children were placed with foster parents when they were young and typically brought back to the foundling schools when they reached 5. Although being an abandoned child was not easy, foundlings began to live longer, get educations, have generally a better quality of care, and go on to live full and normal lives. Living the first 5 years of their lives with the family, foundlings often grew attached to their foster families, and the move back to the foundling hospital was therefore traumatic. David, who was brought to the Foundling Hospital School in Redhill, England in 1932 at age 6, reflects on the experience.
I didn't realise, of course, at the time that my foster mother wasn't my real mother. So it was like taking a child from his mother and dumping him in this ancient and quite forbidding place, really.
The emotional connection is often two-sided, and sometimes foundlings even received inheritances from their foster families or went back to live with them later in life. The Foundling Hospital School in England, which moved locations several times, is a great example of what foundling hospital schools were like. Things were very regimented at school, and that was difficult for many kids to enjoy. Ruth, in 1942, went to the Foundling School in Berkhamsted and described part of her day.
But I do remember that you did have to have a bowel movement every day, or you had to have cerebral fix. So I can remember that. And cleaning teeth. There was a big washroom with basins all the way round, and we stood, I think, probably 2 to a basin. And the nurse would say, taps on, brushes under.
This strict lifestyle made foundlings envious of children with mothers. Ruth goes on to say,
as children, we always played out this game of who our mothers were, and they were always beautiful, important. They weren't ever ordinary people. So we all played the same game.
Children were required to wear matching uniforms, dresses and aprons for girls and slacks and a coat for boys. Everywhere they went, children would walk 2 by 2. The school focused on religion, reading, writing, and math. Although it was not the best education, it was a great improvement in their lives. Foundlings also spent time playing in the band or singing in the chorus. It was a pleasant time for many kids. On their birthdays, classes would sing, and the foundling would receive a gift. The foundling home would have a celebration for Christmas, when they had a special lunch during which the staff would wait on the foundlings. Every child would also receive a present, either from their foster mom or the foundling school. Particularly after both world wars in Europe, teacher and headmaster began to show affection for the kids. They attempted to give the foundlings as close to a normal growing up as they could. After they left the Foundling Hospital School, children were able to get much better jobs due to their education. Boys still often joined the army but could play in the band as opposed to just fight. Girls often worked as servants or laborers, but the Foundling School was able to supply them with a dowry so that they could get married to a fit man. Despite more job opportunities, the stigma attached to foundlings was not gone. Foundlings were even denied jobs because of their illegitimacy. Beatrice talks about being fired because she was a foundling.
She then set about finding out that I had been born illegitimate and there was no way she was working with an illegitimate child. And that we should all be killed at birth because we carried the bad genes.
Life was very different for foundlings who were born after the Romantic movement, but despite the lower mortality rates, better quality care, and stronger job opportunities, life was hardly easy. John attended the Foundling Hospital School in Redhill and Berkhamsted in 1929.
And I remember standing there and looking out the window and seeing a train go by. And I stood there and I thought, now I'm all alone. It's me against the world. And that's the first time I ever thought, that I was somewhere different. That I was in a school. I wasn't with my foster parents. That there was just, I was on my own.